Reynolds started his career in 1990 as a studio crew and floor director at the NBC television. Before joining the OECD, he worked as an economic consultant at the World Bank Group and for the U.S. National Telecommunications and Information Agency. He is currently a senior economist managing the OECD's policy work on the information internet economy after working as an economist and policy analyst at the OECD from 2004 to 2010. He has published 8 books including OECD Internet Economy Outlook 2012 and World Telecommunication Development Report 2003, and written a great number of papers as well. Now, we will invite him to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
안녕하십니까 여러분. 저는 OECD에서 일하고 있는 Taylor Reynolds입니다. 반갑습니다. My name is Taylor Reynolds and I'm an economist at the OECD. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today among you as distinguished students and participants. Today I'm going to talk about the internet economy, which is something that is very dear to me. I'd like to start out today by telling you a story. 20 years ago, roughly 20 years ago, I actually was a student here at Yonsei University. So in 1994 I came and I was a student here, and I was in a class and there was a group of students and we had to write a paper together. I think it was on Asian marketing. And the problem we had is that none of the students had their own computer. And as students visiting here, we actually didn't have computers at home either. So it was quite a challenge 20 years ago for us to find a computer so that we could type up a report for our class together. So what we did is we asked around among all the students that we knew, and we finally found someone whose sister worked in a school it was a primary school, and so we went there on a Saturday when the school was closed. We huddled around a computer and we typed our report together. Now, fast forward 20 years, and you just heard that President Kim of KISTI was saying Korea is the most wired country on earth. It has some of the highest smartphone population. It is really an internet economy. That has happened over the past 20 years. Look at how far Korea has come from me searching to find a computer in 1994 up until now, where there are computers, smartphones everywhere. So there is potential here for the rest of the world to mimic what Korea has done, and the next 20 years I think are going to be quite amazing. So I'll begin today by just quickly telling you what the OECD is. Many of you have maybe heard of the G8 group of countries when presidents meet, the G8. There's also a group of 20 countries which is called the G20. And sometimes I liken the OECD to the group to G34 because it's essentially an economic grouping of 34 countries that represent the most highly developed market economies. And so within the OECD, we cover a lot of different areas, but the area where I specialize is actually the information economy, or the internet. So to begin today, I'd like to talk about where are we in terms of internet development across the world. What is the state of the internet? Well, I like to say that we're in the second wave of internet development. The first wave of the internet was actually taking the internet and connecting it to physical computers via a wired cable. And so we did that for a long time, but now we're firmly in the second stage of internet development where we've gotten rid of the wire, and now we're taking the internet and connecting mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. So this is the area in terms of internet development where we're sitting right now. Now, all of you probably know about the iPad, but did you know that Apple came out with a handheld pocket computer in 1993 called the Newton? How many of you knew that? I've seen a Newton. This was a pocket computer, PDA, very much like a smartphone or a tablet that you have today, 17 years before it came up with the iPad. But it wasn't successful. It was an absolute bomb, and it was a great little tablet, but people didn't use it. So I asked the question, were they 17 years too early? Because we know that the iPad has been a huge success. What was the difference?
We also had PDAs. When you think about where we are in terms of smartphones today, back in 1996, the Palm Pilot arrived. And why was this not a sustainable development at the time? And then we had tablet computers back in 2002, where you could actually twist the screen around and type on the screen. Why were these not a success? Well, I argue that the difference is the mobile internet. What happened in the meantime is you can see here that in about 2008, the number of wireless subscribers to the internet actually jumped. It's a real jump here. You can see the red line goes straight up, whereas the regular number of wired subscribers continued to grow but at a slower pace. So really we saw this switch from the wired to the wireless internet, and I think that has made all the difference. So where are we now? We are in the third wave of integration, and this is now the internet is being connected to devices all across the economy, whether it be self-driving cars, televisions, smart meters for electricity, or GPSs. We're just beginning to imagine all the different things in our economy that can be connected to the internet. So while we're in the second phase now, the next phase of development is going to be connecting everything around us to the internet. So there are some key challenges that governments are facing. One of the big questions that policymakers want to know is how the internet can help solve some of these problems. So I've listed the three here. They are a rough economic recovery, structural unemployment, and changing demographics, and I'll talk about each. This is a billboard of a student in England, and he finished his college education, but as many students know, it's very difficult to find a job in the current economy. So he put up a billboard, and he said, times are so tough, I'm spending my last £500 on this billboard, please give me a job. And then what he did is he put his CV at this page, employadam.com, just to show that people, this is desperate times because the economic recovery is actually very slow after the current economic crisis. Unemployment remains a huge problem in most OECD countries. And you can actually see the chart on the right-hand side. This is the unemployment rate among different age groups. You have, first of all persons, it's about 9%. Women, it's about 9%. Men, it's a little higher. But then when you look at the youth unemployment rate, this is youth 15 to 24 years of age, it is double the unemployment rate for the rest of the economy. So we have a huge challenge in finding jobs for the youth in our economy. And actually, these are the people who know very much about the internet economy. So it's a problem that they don't have jobs. And then finally, we are facing a period of massive demographic change. And those of you who are young right now might not be thinking about this yet, but the number of people who are going to be 65 and older is going to explode. And it's going to explode in such a way that there will be fewer and fewer workers in the economy who are actually supporting a larger number of aged population. So it is vital right now that we find solutions to grow at a faster rate so that we can support this changing demographic. And one of the ways that we can do this, we need these productivity gains. One way we can do this is the internet and ICTs, or information and communication technologies. We believe that these are a platform for innovation and productivity. So how does this all work? Computers, the internet, how do they affect productivity? How can they make the economies more efficient so that we can produce more things and sustain the lives of more people? Well, in 1987, there was a very famous economist, Solow, who came out with what he called the Solow paradox. And he said, you can see the computer age everywhere. You can see the computers are coming into businesses, they're changing the world. The only place you cannot see them is in productivity statistics. So when they tried to measure what is the impact of computers on the economy, on economic growth, on things that matter, they couldn't do it. He said it just doesn't show up in the numbers. So we can see the computers everywhere, but we can't measure it. And we thought that office automation was going to be this big boom, but why can't we catch this in the accounting numbers? So where I worked at the OECD, back in the years 1990 to 2000, we spent a lot of time trying to understand the relationship between ICTs and productivity. So they developed new measures of ICT capital, they harmonized the data across countries, and they controlled for different methodologies in order to come up with data sets that they could analyze to try and understand this phenomenon. Well, it turns out that there's a lag. So the huge investments that Solo was seeing back in 1980 were not showing up in the statistics in 1980. But you know when they showed up? 1990. So with about a 10-year lag, you saw, in 1980 they couldn't capture any of this productivity growth that was going on in the 1980s, but by the 1990s there was a huge boom that was related to the investments 10 years earlier. The same thing went for investments in 1990s. Those weren't seen in the statistics until the year 2000. So this is extremely important for policymaking because it means that the investments that go in now in ICTs, in training, in networks, is going to pay off 10 years down the road. So it's important for us to do these investments now. So we see the internet as an extremely important platform for economic growth. And I think this is something that this generation understands very well. The internet is here to stay, and it is changing the way that we work. I want to give you a couple of examples that I think are illustrative of how the internet is changing things. So when I lived here in Korea, it was quite difficult to find, if you were visiting Korea from abroad, you would have to stay in a regular hotel chain by calling them on the phone in order to find a place to stay. There were also hasukjip, which are small places you could rent a room, or you could stay in a yogwan, which was a kind of a small mini hotel. But they would be difficult to find, and you'd have to walk around and find them. Before I came on this trip today to see you, I actually went online and I used a site called Airbnb, and I looked to see if I could rent a room near Yonsei University on a short-term or longer-term basis. And here are the results that I found. I could have stayed in a furnished studio in Shincheon in Seoul for 28 euros a night. And you can see a list. These are people, ordinary people who are renting out rooms in their house or renting out their entire apartment to people who come and stay. And now the internet is the place where you can go and find all of these things. So I didn't rent a room near Yonsei, but I actually stayed somewhere else using this site just to show how amazing this service is. Another area where we've seen a huge amount of change is record stores. I don't know how many of you have ever visited a record store, but you don't find them very often anymore because we have completely changed the way that we distribute music, and it is much more efficient and much better now, although some people still, I think, miss browsing through the records. In my generation, if you wanted to make a video and you wanted to share it with lots of people, this is how you had to do it. You actually had to record it on VHS, and you took it to a company that had rows and rows and rows of video recorders, and they would record it. And then you would get them in a box, and you would share them with whomever you wanted. Compare that to today with YouTube, with Dailymotion, with all these video sites. It is completely changed. It has completely changed the way that we distribute video, and it is much more efficient now. In my day, if you wanted to learn how to program on a computer, you had to actually go to a university and take courses. Now, you can actually go online to a site like Code Academy, and you can actually be tutored on learning code for free or for a very small fee. So education is changing. And another place that education is changing is in massive online open courses, massive open online courses called MOOCs. And what this allows you to do is take university courses for free or potentially for a fee from universities across the globe. And in some cases, actually get credit for these MOOCs. So even in higher education, we're seeing a huge shakeup because of the power of the internet. One of the interesting things here is some of the professors that teach, it used to be when you taught a course, if you were a very popular professor, you'd have 200 or 300 students in a class, maybe for a first level course. There are certain courses now where professors have 20,000 students listening to their courses every week. And Coursera, which is one of the biggest companies, has 4 million registered users. They have 390 courses, and they partner with 83 universities. So you can see that the internet is opening up education on a massive scale. Another area where we're seeing a lot of change is in manufacturing. And I think, if I'm correct, this is the Tesla factory where they're making cars using robots. But robots are changing the way that the work is done, and menial tasks or very repetitive tasks are now being taken over by robotics, which are controlled by communication technologies. So this has a huge implication on the world because we're changing the way that manufacturing works. And again, this is thanks to computers, this is thanks to ICTs and innovation. So one of the big questions that I get asked when I travel around to places is, what is the internet doing for the economy? And one of the biggest questions is the internet creating jobs or is the internet killing jobs? Because policymakers are pushing internet, 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 internet. But there's a question about what is the net effect of this on people's jobs? Because ultimately that's one of the core things that people care about. So there's two different large views on this in terms of where we're going with the internet. Robert Gordon, who's a professor at Northwestern University, says we are on the threshold of the death of innovation. And he says growth as we know it, economic growth as we know it today, is going to fall, ultimately because of what he calls headwinds. And these are the challenges that we're facing that are going to reduce growth and cause problems in the economy. Number one is the changing demographics, which I talked about, where you have this aging population that won't be working anymore. The second is education, that people are not getting the education that they need. There's a debt problem where countries and individuals are going into too much debt, and he thinks that this will cause the end of growth. And there's inequality in the way that people have access to education, to financing. And because of that, we need massive innovation in order to keep going on the path that we are with the growth rates that we have. But what he says, and he points out it's quite interesting, is he says, can we replicate some of the innovations that we had in the last century? For example, electricity, or central heat, or the combustion engine, or water networks. Those were economy-changing technologies. And he's saying, the internet's great, but is it going to be able to replace or continue the type of growth that we saw earlier with these? He thinks maybe not so much. At the other end of the spectrum is Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT, who was actually saying that it took 30 years for the economy to make very good use of electricity. When electricity first came out, what would happen is you would plug electricity into a business, and the business would use it for a machine, but then everyone else in the economy didn't have electricity. So it took a long time for that technology to come to the point where you can plug in anywhere that you are and have electricity and use it in devices. So he's saying, we're just starting on this rapid acceleration with the internet. We haven't had it long enough to use it for everything yet. And so he thinks that productivity is growing, it's going to continue to grow, but he's worried as well about jobs. He thinks that we potentially are losing jobs if we don't learn how to work with machines. Because machines are getting good at the repetitive manufacturing, but if we don't learn how to use them well, we're going to lose our jobs if we're not better skilled. There's another, I'm sorry for some of the academic literature here, but there's another professor, Otur and Dorn, wrote a paper in 2012 that actually showed what's happening to employment. And this is causing concern to policymakers because there are two groups of skilled labor where jobs are growing, which is very highly skilled. Think about engineers, web programmers, very highly skilled technical people. There's a boom in jobs. So they're at the far right of the x-axis. There's a boom, there's growth in these jobs. The other area where we're seeing growth is actually in service, no skilled labor. So working in, for example, taking orders in a restaurant. But where we're seeing a drop in jobs is everything in the middle. So very low skilled, very high skilled is growing. It's the middle ground that's falling away. So we need to do something to address this problem because people are going to lose jobs if not. So this is an example of some of the jobs that are disappearing in the United States. The number of postal service carriers, so this is the people who carry the mail, down 11%. The people who go out and read your electrical meter, down 17%. Here's one, travel agents. How many of you have gone to visit a travel agent recently? They're down 46%, the number of travel agents. Data key entry, so people who type in data, down 54%. And I think this is one of my favorites, telephone operators. I mean, have you ever spoken to a telephone operator? You know, in my day you had to, and that's down 71%. So those are sectors where we're actually losing jobs. At the same time though, we're moving out of manufacturing jobs where people have to build things with their hands because computers and machines can do that. But we're seeing growth in what we call service sector jobs. And these are jobs like people who cut hair, or something that a machine isn't going to be able to do very easily yet. And you can see that the growth in the number of child care workers in the United States, it nearly doubled in a period of 10 years. So we're seeing a shift out of manufacturing jobs into more service sector jobs. So that's something to be aware of. Another thing the internet people are talking about is, they call it the new inequality. And there's some concern that with the growth of the internet, we're starting to see incomes. We're seeing people that have a lot of money, a lot of money, and then other segments of the society that have very little. And this is just a picture of a house for sale in Silicon Valley, which is obviously one of the most expensive areas in the United States. This house is, did I see how big it was? It is about 96 square meters in size, and it's for sale for $1.1 million, which means that ordinary people with ordinary jobs can't afford to live in Silicon Valley anymore. So that what you're getting is a structure where people can't afford to live there in their own place where they grew up. So, is this new to the internet? You know, we're losing some jobs. We're seeing a transformation of jobs. Is this something that's new to the internet? I would say no. And the reason for that is because technology has always come in and changed the way that the economy works. Here's an example from the United States about agriculture. And the way that the agriculture economists at our work measure this stuff is they say, how many people does it take to produce enough food to cover 90% of the population? So it's a long way of saying, how many workers do you need to produce enough food to feed the economy? And back in the 1930s, the amount of people you needed was 17 workers, compared with what you need in the year 2000 with technology, you need 1. So it took 17 times more workers back in the 1930s to produce food for the United States than it does now. So the question is, what happens to those 16 leftover workers who are here? Where do they go? If they're not working on farms anymore, where do they go in terms of jobs? So in terms of the internet economy, here's what I think. I think you're going to have, with the internet, you're going to have some people that would be displaced, that would move into what we call new high-skilled ICT jobs. These would be data scientists, which is a job that didn't really exist before, app developers, which didn't exist as much, and engineers. So you'll see booms in these types of jobs for very highly skilled ICT workers. The internet is also going to change the way that regular jobs work. So you're going to transform existing jobs. Right now, it doesn't matter pretty much any job you do, you have to be able to know how to use a mobile phone or a personal computer. So those jobs are going to require new skills. And then you are going to have some workers that will lose their job, and there will be no job for them to jump into because they're not very good at acquiring new skills. And so as policymakers, governments need to think about how do we accommodate these people who will be left out with this new internet economy. So the question is, I see 2 key questions that we're trying to address in the OECD. The first is, how can the internet help increase productivity gains and create new jobs? Because if the internet's here to stay, and it is, and it keeps growing, how are we going to create new jobs? What can we do to foster the creation of new companies? And then the second is, how can we use innovation in the internet economy to help facilitate structural adjustment? For example, how can we reduce employment losses and social disruption? What can we do to help match people to jobs? So those are the 2 key policy questions that I think most of our governments are looking at right now. So when I talk about internet policy, I really should point out that we're talking about economic policy. In the past, this was a sector all its own. You know, the ICT people, you leave it to them to talk. But really, when we talk about the internet policy now, it is economic policy. So one of the key things we need to do is support businesses and create economic growth with those businesses. This is a slide that I think is very telling about the potential for economic growth in Korea. So with the internet. So as you know, Korea is, as we said, one of the most connected countries in the entire world. And it may be a little hard to see, but they have nearly 100% PC penetration of computers. Nearly 100% of businesses have an internet connection, and almost all of them have broadband. So really, you're seeing businesses across the whole country are connected. Almost every business has an internet connection. But then when you ask the question, you dig a little deeper and say, how many of those businesses have a website? It's actually about 60% in 2009. So just over half of the businesses have a website. Then you say, how many of those businesses have bought something, like ordered something for themselves online? The number drops to about 45%. But here's the real shocker for me. How many of those businesses, those 100% connected businesses, have actually taken an order online? The number in 2009 was about 10%. So 90% of companies have a connection, but they're not using it to take in orders. So that means there's huge potential here for these companies to come in and use the internet more efficiently. And I picked Korea here, but this is the same across the entire OECD. The picture is always the same in any country that we look at. So what governments are doing is trying to get companies better at using the internet and ICTs. In Canada, they have this, they used to buy computer equipment, so they'd go out and they'd subsidize the cost of a computer or of an internet connection for a company. Now they're saying, we're not going to subsidize the equipment anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to pair you up with a consultant, and that consultant can show you how to use the internet better in your business. We're also seeing the internet coming up with new ways to finance a business. Have most of you heard about Kickstarter.com? Are you familiar with this site? This is a site where you can put up an idea, you propose something, and people can come in and agree to fund you. So they'll give a small amount of money, they pledge money, and if you pledge $99, for example, you could have access to it, you could get a Pebble watch. So the idea is that a company comes up with an idea and says, I have this great idea, I need to raise, here they needed to have a goal of $100,000 to make this watch. They said that, if we have $100,000, we can actually put this watch into production. How many of you are willing to buy one of these if we can come up with the money? So people pledged the money, and actually, this is an older slide, they wanted $100,000 for the Pebble watch in order to start the business. By the time I grabbed this screenshot, it was up to, they had earned, or they pulled in $3.4 million to develop this watch, and it kept going and going and going, and I should look at the final amount, but they were able to raise millions of dollars to develop this watch. And now Pebble, this company that started as an idea on the internet, is seen as one of the huge competitors to Apple and to Samsung for the new watches, smartwatches that will be coming out. So this is an idea that fostered on the internet that bubbled up. In the past, if you wanted to invest in companies, you usually had to have a lot of money, and you had to be connected somehow to a venture capitalist. But the internet is changing that as well. There's a company called Seeders.com that will let you invest in startups, but with as little money as about 10 euros or about 15 US dollars. So very small amounts of money, but they're collecting it, gathering it in, and they invest in startups. So we see that investing and financing is changing because of the internet. In the past, if you started a business, maybe you're good at manufacturing something, but the whole logistics side of the business is quite difficult. If you're very good at producing something as an engineer, you may not be very good at marketing or selling it online. But services like Amazon Fulfillment now, what they allow you to do is actually sell something online. Amazon puts it on their site, they'll sell it for you. You ship it to them in a box, they unpack it, they store it on their shelves, they do everything, they sell it on their website, and then they give you 70% of the revenue, and they keep 30% for themselves. So we see that businesses have lots of tools they can use. Cloud computing, again, You don't have to host a server on site at your business. You can actually use the cloud to do that. It's quite interesting. So in terms of policy, what I think we need to do is treat the internet as an economic engine. We need to look at ways. I don't know, is there anyone from Ghana in the room by chance? No one from Ghana. Okay. If you know, many of you probably use Skype, and you know that if you use Skype, you can make telephone calls out to certain countries, and it's relatively cheap. For example, if I call back to my home country of the United States from anywhere using Skype, it costs me about 2 cents a minute to make a call going back. It's the same for most countries. I can call to a fixed line for very cheap. But what the government of Ghana has done recently is they've said, there's a money-making potential here. And what they've done is they've put huge taxes on any calls coming into the country from abroad. So if you use Skype and you try and call a phone in Ghana, you have to pay roughly 33 cents a minute for any call going into Ghana because of a tax that's been levied by the government. And they did this because they thought times are difficult, we can raise some money by putting taxes on internet phone calls or calls coming into the country. And you know what happened to the number of phone calls coming into Ghana as soon as they did it? They were growing like this, they put in the tax, boom, they collapsed. And actually, this turned out to be a money loser for the government because this was such an elastic good that it dropped and they lost revenues. So the idea here is you don't want to be taxing communications because communications are the foundation of the economy. And typically when we tax something, it's because we want less of it, which is why we tax cigarettes. You're trying to reduce consumption. With the internet, we should be doing the opposite. We should be trying to promote internet consumption. So one other thing, I just wanted to talk about how the internet can help create efficient markets. It used to be when you looked for a job, you'd have to do it in a newspaper. You'd look through the wanted ads in the newspaper. Now, companies such as LinkedIn, which is a social network for businesses, are actually allowing people to advertise job and match job seekers with job seekers and job offerers. And what's really interesting is they can see your LinkedIn profile, they know what your skills are, and they can start suggesting jobs to you that look interesting. So we really see the internet as a tool for making job matching more efficient. I'm right towards the end of my slides here, but there's a particular problem emerging in OECD countries with regards to the economy in general. And that is, we have a statistic that we put out that's called youth that are neither in employment nor in education or training. And they call it NEET, which is an acronym, but neither in employment nor education or training. So that means these are youth in the economy who do not have a job and are not going to school. And you can see in some countries it's as low as 5%, but in countries such as India, Turkey, Greece, Argentina, Mexico, you're looking at roughly 25% of the youth population that does not have a job and they're not going to school. And this could lead to what we call a lost generation, where people are graduating or they're finishing school and they don't have a job, and it's going to be very difficult for them to integrate into the workforce. So I think one of the challenges to you is to think of ways that we can activate and get this group of inactive youth to start using the internet, create businesses, and do things online to help the economy. So I put this as, we need to learn, we need to create, and then we need to share what we do across the economy. So thank you very much. 감사합니다. This, just to close off here, this is the Adam that I talked to you about at the beginning. Turns out we put up a billboard with his CV online, just as a post note here. He actually received 62 solid job offers after he put up this billboard. And it's because his website, he was a web designer and marketing specialist in college. He had 62 offers for jobs that came by putting up this billboard. And he took one of them and he took his first paycheck and he put up this sign and he said, I spent my first wage packet on this billboard. Thank you for helping me. So it goes to show that we really can do something with the power of the internet. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Taylor Reynolds. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him another big hand. It was such Okay, from now on, we'll have question and answer session for today's lecture.
I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have or talk about any specific points if you've got questions. Yes?
What I really gathered from the talk is that basically what I largely gathered from the talk is basically we use the internet to fuel to afford greater job opportunities and to promote that. But then considering the fact that the core economics of a country really lies in its manufacturing segments, and also that's what fuels core productivity of most developing countries at least. How do you bring the use of internet or how do you use in such conditions how jobs would be?
It's an excellent question. I think to understand this, you can look at a country like Korea. Because when you look at Korea 20, 30 years ago, here's a country that was decimated, nearly leveled after the Korean War. They rebuilt, and they rebuilt first as a manufacturing, as a hub for manufacturing. It used to be made in Korea, was stamped on many of the goods that you buy, shoes, clothes. But what happened? So Korea was this great economy. They had low-cost labor. You could come in here, you could buy all sorts of goods. But Korea started getting richer and more successful, and then wages went up, and people had a higher standard of living, and they became richer, and they became more business. And all of a sudden, it was no longer competitive for Korea to be making clothing, because this became something, the wage costs were too high, and what happened was clothing then shifted to other low-cost locales. For example, Bangladesh, it moved to China, largely to China. Well, the challenge that Korea has now is if they can no longer sustain a lot of the manufacturing side, they need to specialize. And they either specialize in very high-tech goods that are done within the economy, like Germany and Switzerland. Think of the watches. They can specialize in very high-tech goods, or they need to shift into services. And so you can see that now Korea is shifting into more of a service-based economy. And this is a challenge that the Chinese are thinking about as well, because all of a sudden incomes in China are now rising up, and they're thinking, how do we shift ourselves into more of a service-based economy? So manufacturing certainly is key, but it's not a long-term solution because wages go up.
What kind of special measures do you think that countries can take to make the adoption process, the IT adoption process, and the transition from manufacturing to a more IT economy as painless as possible, especially in terms of unemployment?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is when you move away from manufacturing, you're going to displace workers. Think of that agricultural example I gave there. You've got 16 workers that lost their jobs somehow in the shift over to a more manufacturing-based economy. Those people need to be retrained. And if they had old-style manufacturing jobs, they somehow need to get the new skills. So what can governments do? First of all, they have to have a program in place to retrain workers. You need to find a way to give these people the new skills that they need. And one of the nice things about the internet, I mentioned the MOOCs, I mentioned the training online, it does open up huge possibilities, but we still haven't figured it out. So I would say that really it's about retraining workers when we can. It's not easy, but we're looking for solutions.
Thank you for the lecture. I want to ask about your point when you talked about race with machine.
Yeah.
did you actually refer to this work? There was a recent TED talk about also this issue. So there are 2 points: race against the machine and race with machine. And for example, in this TED talk, TED conference.
The pictures, I think I grabbed them from the TED Talks.
Okay, because in this TED talk they showed this robot for manufacturing, very safe and very user-friendly robot, where every employee can teach this robot to follow their movements, to follow their actions. And in this case, I think robots will help to solve the issue of unemployment, because it will be very easy to teach robots, like these user-friendly robots. That's why my question is personally to you: are you afraid of unemployment which is caused by ICT, or you support this kind of new technologies like these user-friendly robots? What is your personal opinion?
Okay, this is a very good question. The picture that I showed you was actually a new, the picture with the robots was a Tesla factory, which is a new electric car that is very innovative, and the company is building it mainly with robots. But that's been quite common in the automobile industry. What's fascinating though is the company Philips, which is from the Netherlands. And maybe you know they're the ones who make razors, they make light bulbs and lots of things. But Philips is one of the largest producers of razors. And it turns out that razors are very complex to do for men because they have very small parts, it's very precision-oriented work, and it's actually more complicated to make a shaver, a razor, one of these that turns, the electric ones, than it is to make a smartphone. So what Philips did is, Philips had a large manufacturing plant in the Netherlands where they employed thousands of people who would make these razors. And then as costs got cheaper and cheaper in China for labor, they shifted a lot of their workforce over to China to actually build the razors. But when automation came back, when these robots were fast enough, what they did is they actually installed the robots back in the Netherlands. There were very few people working in the factory, but they put in now robots that can do very precise work to build these razors in a way that one robot can do what, I don't know, 200 workers used to do in the past. So the jobs, what happened is jobs left the Netherlands, they lost those jobs and they moved to China. But as the robots came in, some jobs are now moving back to the Netherlands to work with the robots. Because you need high-tech people, first of all, to build the robots, to design the robots, to build the software that works with the robots, to market. So they have a smaller number of people, but those people have much higher skills. So what does that mean in terms of jobs? The Netherlands lost jobs originally, and they moved to China. Now, they didn't gain probably many jobs back, but the jobs that they did get back were better and higher paid. So when Björn talks about race with the machines, what he's talking about is we need to start designing the education system to build, to create the kind of engineers that can build those types of robots and work with robots. You're going to have some employment losses, but that's why we need to pick those up in jobs across the sector, potentially in the service sector jobs. But yeah, it's a great point.
Okay, thank you for your lecture. My question is about your career path. I see your resume. I see your career path. You have such a great and fancy career path all the way along to this way. So my question is about, could you tell the students how the student here can be a person like you? Because you experienced OECD, ITU, and World Bank future managers career.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world because I was able to match two things I absolutely love. So I studied economics, and then so my degrees are in economics, but I have this love of the internet. So I used to work on the internet back in 1993 on Gopher, which was before the World Wide Web. I saw this thing and I thought, this is amazing. I think this is going to be a fantastic technology. So I loved the internet, I loved the economics, and I was able to find a job that merged those two together. So I took two things I was passionate about, I stuck them together, and I got the IT skills and I got the economic skills. And that's really what helped me in my career. It's interesting because this is one of the things that we see in terms of retraining the population. It is no longer enough to have just one set of skills. So let's say you're a plumber, right? You're someone who understands plumbing. You need to have plumbing skills, but you also need to have ICT skills on the side to supplement that. You need to market your business. You need to know how to communicate with people. So there's a dual set of skills that people need to know, and it seems like we haven't been teaching that very well. We teach either you go to plumbing school, but you don't learn about ICTs, or you become an ICT specialist and you know nothing about plumbing. So I think the advice that I give to people who are going through school, or young people now, is match up technical skills in IT and ICTs, know how to do this with something else, with some other specialty, something you care about, and I think that's going to help. The other thing that helped for me, and I tell this to people all the time, is internships. So my first job that I got was, that actually combined my two, was an internship with the US government in the US Department of Commerce. So I was an intern while I was a student, and what that did is it gave me some experience that allowed me to apply for a job at the World Bank with the economics and the IT background. And from there, I was able to move to the ITU, which is based in Geneva, and then from there to the OECD. So really, my foot in the door came from an internship that I did when I was a student. And I think sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're unpaid. But I think it's very important to get your foot in the door because you need to have some experience. But once you do, it's a very nice career.
I would like to ask you the current about your opinion about the current situation of Korean IT workers, notably those IT web developers or programmers working in South Korea. As you might know, the IT workers in South Korea are living in the condition of subcontractor compared to the good situation of those web designers and developers working in Silicon Valley or other cities in the US or the Netherlands, for example. So I would like to ask you your proposed solution to improve the situation of IT workers in South Korea.
You know, I'm not an expert on the domestic situation here in Korea, but what I can tell you is, you know, I can't remember the name of the website, but there is, I came across a website not too long ago where consultants, or people who have these skills of building applications, developers, can actually go onto a website and sell their skills globally. So it's, think about the Airbnb example where if you have an apartment to rent, you put it up on offer and then people come in and hire your skills on a contract basis. This site, what it does is it manages that for IT specialists and developers. So what you can do is you can actually go into the site, register, and you can actually take jobs from around the world if you've got a certain set of skills. What I would say is that the demand is so high right now in most countries for web developers, for IT specialists, for any type of programmer who can work with the internet. They cannot turn out enough graduates in most OECD countries. One of the big policy issues is how do we get more students through the system that can do this? And that being the case, if you have a shortage of jobs, shortage of people who can do jobs, what it's best to advertise yourself internationally and start taking jobs that are coming in internationally. And I think, you know, once you have a reputation, you can start doing that on your own. But again, this is an area where it's in very high demand, and I think you creating your own proper business selling outside if you're a web developer is probably something that can be very profitable. You
will have to be able to communicate probably in English with your clients, but again, that's another set of skills to participate in.
I got a fairly booming voice. I think I'll be okay. In the case of the United States and a lot of developed countries, South Korea included, private business, got a pretty big voice. South Korea and the United States, private business was really big in pushing infrastructure and getting PCs into homes, getting people wanting to adopt. I'm sure you remember those AOL 150 free hour CDs. A lot of the talk, especially at the state level now for developing countries, they talk about a lot of state initiatives, a lot of policy initiatives. Do you think state-led development into infrastructure is possible? Or do you think business probably needs to be another driving force in there as well?
Yeah. Typically, from an OECD standpoint, for infrastructure like this, we'd like to see private sector really in, because governments can make some pretty big mistakes in terms of promoting the wrong type of technology. You'd kind of like to let the government, businesses come in and do this on their own. With internet infrastructure, though, it becomes different because there is a real economic incentive to have this in the same way that you would want to have roads, you want to have sewage, you want to have any sort of water treatment. Governments have a role in putting in basic infrastructure. And I think as the internet and communication technologies become more and more core type infrastructure, we let the private sector do everything they can. We let that work. And if there are problems, if there are areas where, for example, in rural areas, if they're not getting connectivity, if the private sector says it's not worth it, then I think the government has a role to step in and help extend connectivity. So for example, in India, one of the ways that they extended connectivity several years back was to actually run fiber optics into the train company that would actually lay fiber optic lines along its tracks to, at the, I think it's Taluka level, which is the, whatever, my pronunciation is right, but into relatively small geographic areas, they would run a fiber alongside the train tracks because they had a very well-developed train infrastructure. And the government helped with that, putting those in. And then once the connectivity is close, then the private sector can pick it up and start selling services based on the connectivity at a city level or a community level. So there is a role for government. Maybe there was one last question. Maybe there was a question, I think.
Thank you for the lecture, and I'd like to ask you about the problems of ICT industries, because on the introduction phase of ICT industries, the growth of these industries may cause severe stock market bubble nationwide, and the country may face economic falls as the bubble pops, and it could be very devastating to the developing countries. And how could the nation avoid these kind of problems?
In the year 2000, we did see the internet bubble. That we saw this huge growth in the year 2002. It all collapsed, and there was a huge decline. But in the meantime, what's happened is you did have to crash in the bubble, but you've seen growth that's come back up that I think is more realistic over time. I don't think there's much the governments can do to really stop this, because this is the private sector and these are individual investors for listed companies. But I think we're seeing more longer-term growth that I think is more sustainable.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please show our appreciation by giving a big hand. Thank you. We will now have a short coffee break. After the coffee break, I cordially ask all our guests to enter New Millennium Hall and be seated no later than 11:15, as panel discussion 1 entitled Economic Growth and Social Cultural Benefits will begin at 11:20.